I would like to thank His Excellency Army General Assimi Goïta, President of the Transition in the Republic of Mali, for the warm welcome. I would also like to tell you that the quality of our discussions truly impressed me. I was expecting a meeting of just a few minutes, 10 minutes at most. We stayed for an hour. I learned a lot from the President of the Transition.
The African Union Commission delegation was in Mali, Bamako. They came purposely to offer their support and solidarity and to condemn the act of terrorism and cross-border terrorist crisis in the Sahel, and they came to throw their weight behind Mali, like they said in this video.
I would also like to take this opportunity to tell you that the African Union Commission, which I have the honor of leading, you are not only aware that I have the honor of leading it, would like to engage in this dialogue with the Malian government to see how the Commission could be of any assistance in this process, which is first and foremost that of the Malian authorities and the Malian people to restore peace and stability, and a process which normally will certainly have a political horizon, and this political horizon will surely be expressed through elections. I believe that the previous steps have already been taken, the charter, the constitution that has been established. I believe that is Africa's message. Africa would like to see a stable Mali, a Mali that has, I would say, excellent relations with its neighboring countries, a Mali where constitutional order and restore it. I believe that Mali's suspension from African political institutions is not an attempt to isolate Mali. Above all, it is a way to reaffirm the rules and procedures that are ours, but also to tell Mali, we are by your side so that you can move forward.
Now, this is where we have problem, ladies and gentlemen. You see, the hypocrisy of the African Union is structural. It's not just isolated. So, in the July of the year 2000, in a conference hall in Lomé, Togo, African head of states gathered to solve a problem. The problem was a coup. Military men with guns who decided elections were too slow. The solution they came up with was a document. Now, the Lomé Declaration. It said simply, if you take power by force, we will not recognize you. You will be suspended, you will be sanctioned, and you will be isolated until constitutional order is restored. Now, fast forward to 2020. Mali soldiers removed the French-backed president Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta.
Former Vice President Assimi Goïta, a colonel who led the August coup and last week's revolt, was declared president on Friday.
Within 48 hours, the African Union suspends Mali.
The African Union has suspended the country's membership days after its military staged a second coup. The bloc has even threatened Mali with sanctions if the civilian transitional government is not restored. If imposed, these sanctions would severely impact the country, which is among the world's poorest. The African Union said that the situation in Mali was deeply concerning.
Sanction followed. Now, the regional body ECOWAS joined in after so much pressure. Now, the message is clear. Return the constitutional order now. Fast forward to 2015, Rwandan President Paul Kagame holds a referendum. The constitution is amended. Term limits was gone. He wins again in 2017. 98.8% of the vote. He will be eligible through 2034. What did the African Union say? Absolutely nothing.
He was the savior of Rwanda.
Every one of the elections that he ran, those who opposed him went to prison. And their supporters have been arrested, tortured, many of them killed.
I have almost by nature become rebellious. I tell anybody, and I mean anybody. I tell anybody who thinks they can tell me what to do, how this country should be, I'll tell them to go to hell.
Now, fast forward to 2008, Cameroon, President Paul Biya, in power since 1982, up to this day. Changes in constitution, term limit are removed entirely. He is now in his 5th decade. as a president of a country in Africa.
92-year-old President Paul Biya has been declared winner of the country's October 12th presidential election. According to the Constitutional Council, Biya got 53.7% of the vote compared to the 35.2% of his main challenger, Issa Chiroma. It does, however, note that voter turnout in this...
What did the African Union say? Nothing. Is this looking a certain way to you? That if the coup is being carried out with the acceptance of certain powers, it is acceptable by the African Union? Ladies and gentlemen, can't you see the hypocrisy? Fast forward to 2020, the same year Mali was suspended. Côte d'Ivoire, President Dramani Alassane Ouattara ran a third term. His own constitution says nothing more than 2 terms. His argument, the new constitution resets the clock.
This is what remains of a police station in the southeastern town of Bonua, as opposition supporters clash with security forces. It's the latest in a series of demonstrations taking place across Ivory Coast for a 3rd consecutive day. The protests threaten to plunge the country, once an island of stability, into its biggest political crisis since the Civil War of 2010. The contention is a declaration by President Alassane Ouattara to run again.
We are protesting for the President Ouattara to go because the constitution has been violated, and we don't want to accept a 3rd term. We call on the entire population of Ivory Coast to join us in making Ouattara leave.
That was what he said. Now, what did the African Union say? Nothing. So here's the question. Why does the African Union punish a soldier in Bamako within 48 hours but stay silent when a president in Kigali, in Rwanda, or in Abidjan does exactly the same thing? This was never about democracy. It was about something entirely different. Now, in August 2020, soldiers of Mali, they arrested President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, known as IBK. Now, here is what the Western media didn't show you. The streets of Bamako were not in mourning when this happened. People were celebrating. Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta government had become deeply unpopular, extremely corrupt. Ladies and gentlemen, a deteriorating security situation despite years of French military presence, an economy that served a narrow elite while the population struggled. But the African Union didn't ask why Malians were celebrating. The African Union looked at the method, a military takeover, and applied the Lomé formula: suspension, sanction, return to constitutional order. May 2021, a second coup. Right? This time, the transition of president and prime minister who were themselves installed after the first coup were removed. As Goita takes charge, the sanctions tightened, ECOWAS and the African Union speak with one voice against Bamako.
Let's look at the fact that the ECOWAS was the first to suspend Mali's membership of the bloc, and now it has been followed by the African Union. Does the suspension by African Union give any sort of potency to that by the ECOWAS?
I must tell you that it has proven over time that the use of sanctions or the threat of sanctions has not been a veritable deterrence or solution when African countries truncate democratic processes in that country. The thinking would be that by now, institutions like the ECOWAS and AU should have evolved a more effective mechanism for dealing with such intersection by all these military ventures. Because at the end of the day, real analysis will tell you that the people who suffer most from these sanctions imposed on countries like Mali, a very poor country listed as one of the poorest countries in the world, would always be the ordinary people of Mali. Those sanctions will not in any credible way affect the leaders of this coup, the political class, and the elite in that country.
Now pause. So how long did it take for the AU to criticize Paul Kagame constitutional referendum in 2015? Ladies and gentlemen, the one that cleared the path for him to rule until 2034. Never, they did not. Now, how long did it take the AU to speak up when Ouattara ran for the 3rd term that his own constitutional reform explicitly forbade? Never. but Mali 48 hours. Paul Kagame, Rwanda, in power since year 2000. That's 26 years. Paul Biya, Cameroon, since 1982. That's 43 years. He's 92 years old. He has been president for longer than most Cameroonians have been alive. The African Union was silent, no statement, no suspension, not even a mind expression of concern. Third, Ouattara, elected in 2010, re-elected in 2015. 2 terms, the constitutional limit, that's all. But in 2020, he runs again. His argument, the new constitution adopted in 2016 reset the presidential term clock. His own constitutional court appointed him, agrees, he wins the 3rd term. The African Union's response, in the same year that Mali was suspended within 48 hours, was silent. A president who uses the constitution to stay in power, that's stability, that's sovereignty, that's an internal democratic process. But a soldier who removes that same precedent, that's adjusted, that doctored the constitution to suit his own will, it's called unconstitutional. Even when the people are dancing in the streets. Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, they didn't just change their leaders, they changed their alignment. They rejected French sphere of influence, they rejected the post-colonial security architecture, they rejected the economic arrangements that have redefined Francophone relationships since independence. And they did it not through constitutional amendment or legal engineering. They did it through coup, through soldiers, through method that the Lomé Declaration that was constituted by African head of state was specifically designated to prevent. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the real crime. Now, you can stay in power for 43 years like Paul Biya if you maintain the alignment. You can extend your rule until 2034 like Paul Kagame. And if you keep the existing order intact, you absolutely cannot stay in power for 5 months if you tell the former colonial power to pack his bag and leave. The African Union didn't sanction Mali because the constitution was violated. The African Union sanctioned Mali because the right people didn't do the violation. The right people that didn't do the violation, they are the politicians, and they will always want the colonial master to stay to continue to protect them. In 2021, a senior analyst at the Accord Conflict Resolution Center, a man who had served as chief of staff of the Organization of African Unity, Secretary General, published an article arguing that Lomé framework is outdated. He said, and I quote, that the policy was written when African problem was military coups, and it was never updated to address constitutional coup. The African Union own policy experts, its own former officials, are telling you the framework is broken. They are telling you it's outdated. They are telling you it's designed to protect incumbents, not democracy. The billion-dollar question for the African Union right now is, will the African Union reform itself? Will it close the loopholes that permits presidents to become monarchs? Let me answer that question with another question. Would you vote for that reform? The very president who benefits from the loophole, the very head of state who wrote the loophole into existence in Lomé in the year 2000. The African Union will never reform the Lomé Declaration because the Lomé Declaration is not a bug. It's a feature. It's working exactly as it is designed to work. So families, let me leave you with the final thought here. If African Union applied its own standard consistently, if it suspends every member state whose leaders have violated constitutional term limit, extended its power, its rule beyond what originally was permitted, or engineered the legal system to entrench himself in power, how many members of the African Union will be left today? What the African Union fears isn't the absence of democracy, ladies and gentlemen. It is the example like we have in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. All right, the type of example that is anti-imperial, that is what the African Union High Commission, that is what they fear.
So why did this photo strike me? I saw this photo at an exhibition about the army and photography at the French Army Museum. And all of a sudden I came across this photo that was published in 1891 in the magazine L'Illustration, And I quickly realized that this is the first photo through which the French public was able to see the atrocities of the colonial conquest in sub-Saharan Africa by the French troops.
So what year was that?
1891, that is, for technical reasons, you see, because before that cameras were too big, not very portable. Starting from those years, the size started to decrease, and explorers, people who accompanied the French soldiers on operations, could start to carry their equipment with them. And so this photo is the first one, and it was published in L'Illustration, apparently without causing any particular stir in France at the time. So I started to dig around the photo and around the accompanying article.
Yes, that's when you actually began to conduct your investigation.
Yeah, to dig around, because the article described a bit of the atmosphere of the colonial conquests of the time. There was a certain...
Actually, it was located right here in French Sudan.
Yes, what was called French Sudan, which today now includes Senegal, Mali...
Niger,
Burkina as well. At the time, it was called French Sudan. And so, well, there you go. I pulled together a series of places, events, people. And ultimately, what fascinated me was realizing that this history, which was a significant story at the time, the way France took over, conquered these countries that later became its empire, what fascinated me was realizing that I knew nothing about this history. That is to say, I was never taught anything about it.
Not at school, for example.
Nor at school. Yet I paid attention in school. I was a good student. Not in middle school, not in high school, nor afterwards.
Not by historians either.
Not by historians either.
The African Union will lead to reform itself. Will the African Union ever, be shameful enough to apply the same rule to guys like Paul Biya, Paul Kagame, Alassane Ouattara? Why are they always... In fact, I was shocked that those people can shamelessly stand right there and admit that Burkina Faso, that the Malian government should come back to constitutional order. Ladies and gentlemen, and that is where I have problem with the African Union. Thank you, and God bless you.